We're now ready for the presentation of the Thomas H. Scholl Lecture by Visiting Entrepreneurs, where successful entrepreneurs share with the Stevens community their experiences in converting innovative ideas into high-value tech startups. This lecture series is made possible by a generous gift from Stevens trustee Thomas H. Scholl. Tom, an entrepreneur and a great friend of Stevens, is with us today, and I would like to invite him on stage to introduce our keynote speaker. Oh, here he is. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Christos. One of the great things about creating this lecture series is one of the things I get to do is invite my friends to speak to you. As you know, we call this the Visiting Entrepreneurs Lecture Series and not the Entrepreneurship Lecture Series, and the reason for that is all the people that present here are people that have been there, done that, and have been successful. And my friend Dr. Winslow L. Sargeant has been one of the most successful people as an entrepreneur, but also a person in life whom you will, I'm sure, will realize when he speaks. Dr. Winslow Lorenzo Sargeant is Managing Director of S&T LLC, a firm supporting investment and business development for early-stage growth companies in cybersecurity, energy, communication, capital formation. And in 2010, President Obama appointed him to the position as Chief Counsel for Advocacy in the U.S. Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy. He recently resigned at the end of January 2015, citing his desire to spend more time with his family. Dr. Sargeant served as Managing Director from 2006 to 2010 for Venture Investors LLC, an early-stage venture capital firm in Madison, Wisconsin. And from 2001 to 2005, he was Program Director at the National Science Foundation Small Business Innovation Research Office, and that's where I actually met Winslow for the first time. In 1997, Dr. Sargeant and 9 colleagues co-founded AANet, a company some of you may remember, a fabless semiconductor chip company with seed money from Cisco Systems. The company's first product, the OctoPhi, was a unique microchip that could eliminate bottlenecks in the internet routers at the time by increasing their performance tenfold. In addition, the low-cost, low-power chip could channel information through a single high-speed connection rather than sending it through parallel connections. The 47-employee company sold 2.5 years later to British Columbia's PMC Sierra, and Dr. Sargeant stayed on with PMC for a year before joining NSF. He served as Associate Adjunct Professor, so he's also been an academic, in electrical engineering at the University of Pennsylvania from 2000 to 2005. He was a member of the Board of Trustees, or he is a member of the Board of Trustees at Wisconsin to this day. He is chair of My QVO, an early stage education company in Washington, D.C., and Dr. Sargeant received the inaugural 2002 Wisconsin Distinguished Young Alumni Award and was a 2003 Outstanding Award winner from Northeastern University. He was a 2014 Wisconsin Distinguished Engineering alumnus, and he is also a Kaufman Fellow in the class of 2011. He got a BS in Electrical Engineering from Northeastern University, an MS from Iowa State, and a PhD from in engineering, electrical engineering from University of Wisconsin in Madison. As you can see, a very accomplished individual. Now, when I first met Winslow, since he started as an academic and then became an entrepreneur, I met him at NSF and I said, you know, why did you join NSF? And he said, you know, Tom, I just felt like I had to give back. I had to get something back. And I'm sure that's why he also did the chief advocate position at the SBA. So this is a guy who creates things, who makes things happen, but also is somebody who gives back, and I think that very much fits into the Stevens culture. At this point, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sargeant.
Well, good morning again. Good morning. And I want to thank Tom for that introduction. I want to thank President Faradin, the Board of Trustees, the faculty and staff for the invite to come and speak with you here today. I want to thank the students. It's been a great pitch. As Tom shared with you my background, I guess I've done a whole bunch of things. I guess one could have accused me of maybe having ADHD because you're doing so many things, but it's not that. It's just that you'll know that once you're able to challenge yourself to solve problems, it's just so much fun to see what you can do. And with your education, what you're getting here today, your just the ability to solve problems, you'll be pleasantly surprised at the bedrock, that the foundation that you're getting. You'll be able to go into a host of different areas that you may never have dreamt of to solve problems. As was mentioned, most recently I was within the administration, within the Obama administration, where I served as Chief Counsel for Advocacy, where I was appointed by the President in 2010. What was not said was that I was actually nominated in 2009, and I went through a confirmation hearing, and some members of Congress didn't think that an engineer should be Chief Counsel for Advocacy, so I was filibustered for more than 10 months, and then I had to get a recess appointment, and that created some problems too. But once I got into office, I went about doing my job, and I was subsequently confirmed. And so I guess I just wanted to share that with you. Just like with innovation, just like with starting a company, it may take a little longer than you plan, but just stick to it, just stay with it. It's going to be worth it in the end. But also, you'll be surprised where you'll be 20 years from now. So make sure that when you're posting your pictures and you're doing stuff online, one day you might be tapped by an official, and then you'll have to go through a hearing of some kind. So make sure, think long term. But most recently, I was the Chief Counsel for Advocacy, where the post was the independent voice for small business within the executive branch. And so my job was not to represent the administration. My job was to represent small businesses and entrepreneurs to the administration. And so in that role, I had to take a look at what are some of the rules that would come out of a law and how those rules would impact small businesses. And so that's why for this talk today, I wanted to focus on regulations, on innovation, and on entrepreneurship. And I picked that order because when you think of regulation, regulations tend to be a response to something that has already happened. So that deals with the past. When you think of innovation, it deals with what's going on right now. We need to do something right now to fix something. And when you think of entrepreneurship, it's about the future. How do we monetize? How do we take what we know and how do we make it better? How do we come up with a better product or service or something? And so that's why it's regulation, the past, thinking about the innovation right now, and also thinking about entrepreneurship. As was mentioned, I spent some time at the National Science Foundation, and while there, we had a motto, and I really took that motto, and even when I was at SBA, this is a motto that I often said, that research is a transformation of money into knowledge. And I would put a but here, but innovation is the transformation of knowledge into money. So let's just think about what that says, right? That if we can use the black box approach, that if you have an input, that the input to research is money, is funding, and the output is knowledge or a patent, right? So if you give a researcher money, funding, they're going to come up with knowledge, right? But when you take that knowledge and you put it into the black box of innovation, then the output should be what we call broadly defined as money, but we could say products and services. It's a solution. It's we're monetizing that knowledge. And so that's very important. And of course, that knowledge, it's a virtuous cycle. That knowledge, you pay taxes, hope, and then it goes back into that virtuous cycle. And so I like to focus on the second part because I always want to know how to transform that knowledge into money. And so that's where tech transfer takes place. That's where what you're doing today and some of the pitches that I've heard is that you're looking at how do we take that knowledge that we have, how do we look at a problem and transform that into knowledge. When we think of the innovation process, one of the last things that I was asked by the Obama administration was to take a look at what are some of the challenges that should be addressed or should be thought about now. Because when you think about that in government, they tend to look at what's going on right now. And so what I wanted to do was to take a look at what are some of the challenges with regard to the innovation process and what we should do and what can be tweaked to make it better. And so we came up with a 6-point process. One could tweak it to make it 4 or 5, but this is a process that we discussed. And there is a report that's out, and so you're more than welcome to go to the SBIR, the Office of Advocacy site to take a look at it. It's a report that we shared with the president and his team. And so basically what we outlined a host of things. For example, one of the challenges with entrepreneurship, especially with students who are graduating, it's hard to go out and start a company when you're worried about your student loans. And so what can be done to incentivize those who have this debt that's hanging over their head, and there's a temptation to say, well, maybe I should just go work a job so I can pay off my loan. So yes, I have this great idea, but do I risk not being able to meet these monthly payments? So what can be done? And so there are a host of things like that, and so it's a good read, and I would recommend it. But when we think about this whole thing of moving from the lab to the market, many times we know that the government will start out with translation research, and that works fine. You know, there are a host of programs and that we can use to fund the idea. But as we move down the chain, many times we come into what's called the valley of death. And so the valley of death is where you've launched a company, you need more funding, maybe you've gotten some angels, maybe you're trying to, you're not quite ready for the Series A. How do you make that transition? How do you get enough to cross the valley of death? And so what we did when I was at the National Science Foundation, we put together this chart. And there are a whole bunch of challenges with the valley of death. And so I just wanted to share that with you, and I'll actually come back to some of this here throughout this talk in terms of what could be thought of in terms of trying to cross the valley of death. But whenever we talk about funding, we always go back to what role should the government play. I believe that there is a public-private partnership that the government should play. And when the government starts to fund things, we ask, is the government tipping the scales to one technology or the other? Or should the government be a constructive partner? I believe that the government plays a role because when you think of, especially with grants, right? When you're going to fund an idea, fund a research, you have to pick who's going to get funding. And so that's where you reach out to thought leaders, and then you bring in panels and say, well, these are some of the ideas that we are looking to fund. What are some of the national challenges that we need to address? And so that's a way that the government plays a role, but I do believe that there needs to be a private-public partnership. I also like to say that government has always played a role in commercialization. We talk about the Constitution. We talk about the Commerce Clause. Article 1, Section 8 says that to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for a limited time to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. So this is part of the Constitution. This is what's great about our country, is that our founding fathers had the foresight to know that we need to put a system in place to take into account that if you're going to come up with discoveries, you should be able to protect those discoveries. You should have a right to those discoveries. I'm quite sure that the Stevens family, the first family of entrepreneurship, they made use of the patent system. Within the first dozen patents that were issued, there was at least one from the Stevens family. And so we know that we need to have a system in place that encourages not just the innovation, but entrepreneurship. But to have the innovation, we have to make sure that we have the regulatory system in place that will allow us to take ownership of what we're going to invent. Now, I just wanted to share some of the patents that were issued. There was a Morse patent for Morse code. Then there's a Bell patent. Since I spent so many years at Bell Labs, this is a patent that was granted in 1876. And of course, there's one, I wanted to share with you this patent because when I was talking to my son about Tesla, and I shared with him that this patent came out in 1894, he was surprised because he thought that Tesla was only a car. And I'm quite sure all of you know that Tesla was a real person. And so, but this is part of our history. And so when we talk about technology transfer, one of a date that is pivotal for us in this country is 1980. And the reason why is that in 1980, all right, because prior to 1980, our government would grant what we call a non-exclusive license to patents. So in 1978, the U.S. government owned over 28,000 patents, but had licensed less than 4%. And the reason why is that, just think of this, right, that if you have a non-exclusive to a patent, you don't want to be the first to use that technology to show that there's a market for that idea, because you have a non-exclusive, all right? I mean, we always say that in venture capital sometimes that it's better to not be the first to market, but to be the fast follower. So if you have a non-exclusive, it's better to be a fast follower than the first to market, because why should you plow the road and to show how this can be used, because someone who, once they see it, they can just follow on and then be a competitor. But less than 4% were issued, 28,000 patents just sitting on the government's shelves, right? Now, we always had tech transfer. The first tech transfer program started in 1924 at the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. And this came about because one of the professors there had identified that vitamin D, when used, could help to ward off the onset of rickets, because in colder climates during the wintertime, you're not seeing a lot of the sun, and so kids aren't going outside to play, and so that led to rickets. And so once you could put vitamin D in milk, that helped to ward off the onset of rickets. Well, at that time, a public institution was an ivory tower. It's like, we do research here, but we don't have anything to do with business. And so there was a move to create a separate entity to be able to commercialize that technology. So that's how vitamin D got to the marketplace. Now, there was another technology that actually came out of Wisconsin. It's called Coumadin, or warfarin. How many of you have heard of warfarin or Coumadin? Great. Well, the story behind Coumadin, is that that's actually rat poison. And so what happened is that when you would dissect a rat who had died from warfarin or from Coumadin, you noticed that the blood was very, very thin. So someone said, well, maybe this could be used as a blood thinner. I wonder what person said, I'll be the first to try this rat poison. Well, it's still in use today, but that's how technology can be used, and it's amazing how it has helped to save so many lives. But 1980 was a time where we moved into a different era, because in 1980, the Bayh-Dole Act was passed, and Bayh-Dole was instrumental. We cannot underestimate the impact of what's Bayh-Dole, because Bayh-Dole, for the first time, gave ownership to technology that was funded by the government. So for the first time, a professor, an inventor, a researcher, or a university could take title because of Bayh-Dole. There was another, in 1981, something else happened that helped tech transfer. This was, in 1981, there was a pilot program called the SBIR, the Small Business Innovation Research Program. And it was a pilot program at the National Science Foundation. Actually, the first chief counsel for the Office of Advocacy, he was the one that encouraged the start of this program. And this program was so successful that he lobbied Congress to expand it to all federal agencies that had what we call an extramural budget of over $100 million. So now today this program gives away on average more than $2.5 billion per year. Grants, primary grants, some contracts to help to facilitate tech transfer. And so this model works, it has a phase one model, it's a phase one, $150,000, a phase two, up to $750,000, and then there's a phase three, that's a commercialization program. But these programs have helped, and so what I'm showing you in these two slides is that regulation by Dole helped to clear up the title of who owns what. And then a program like the SBIR program helped to, okay, since you own the title, how can the government help in terms of commercialization? How do you move from the lab to the marketplace? Now, there's a lot of discussions in terms of what role does tech transfer play at the university level. And so what this slide shows is that, this is a Caltech slide, this shows that it's a very convoluted model. There's lots of interaction because you're dealing with not only with if the technology is worthy of a business, what type of contracts and how do you license and who gets involved, and so it can be very complicated. But we know that there's a model that works. This model needs to be tweaked many times just to make sure that it works, that'll work for Stevens, but it works. What we're also seeing, that it's not your grandfather's TTO anymore. That TTOs are being asked by government, states, and universities to do a lot more and to have a broader job description. The university model that we knew has changed. It's a broader mandate. Not only is the university being asked to train and teach, but now the university is asked to facilitate entrepreneurship, but not just that, to help the broader community. So once you're part of a community will ask, the mayor may ask, the governor may ask, what is the university doing for the neighborhoods? What is the university doing for those businesses who surround the university? So the university has now become the centerpiece, the bedrock of many of our communities. And it has become more so because what has happened since in the last 20 years, we're seeing more research moved from the national labs. I work for Bell Labs. I work for IBM. Great companies, but now these companies have moved away from research, and now this research is being is moved to the university. And so now the university is taking a broader role, which, so now we've had to change the model and to see how it works, but yet more funding is not coming to the university. And so that's why this is the times that we're in they're very fluid in terms of how do we make this work? How do we stay true to our mandate in terms of education and teaching and research? But at the same time, now someone is adding, what have you done for the region, and how have you created more jobs, and also when you think of a university in terms of how a university is funded, there are primarily three ways that funding takes place. One, from tuition. The second would come from the government or federal or state. And then the third now is philanthropy. And so that's all part of funding. But now there's another fourth, and that's license revenue. How do we monetize the IP or the technology that's being developed? And that's all part of the funding for universities. And so what the slide shows here is that that in 2014 there were roughly 5,000, more than 5,000 license and options were executed by universities. This is data that I got from Otto, and out of that, more than $2 billion. So now the university is generating revenue. Now, that's good, but also what one needs to be careful is that those within government will say, since you can generate your own revenue, we're going to pull back. And I think that's bad. That we need to make sure that we fund universities and that so that they can follow through with their mission. In 2014, there were more than 22 patents that were filed. Once again, these are by universities, out of which 5,000 were awarded. And as I mentioned, there is a call for the regional impact of technology transfer. The Association of University Technology Managers data shows that of the initial phase of product development, over 70% of it occurs right around the university. When I was in venture capital, we would say that when you think of an invention or the research from a university, that there's a radius typically of around 50 to 70 miles. So as you focus more on research and as you develop your plan, you're going to have a huge impact right in Hoboken, but in the northern New Jersey, New York area, because companies are going to be created, people will tap into the talent here, and so, but that's relatively new in terms of the role that's being called to play by universities. While universities are still asked to do basic research, and not too many VCs that I know will fund basic research. That's where government must play a role. VCs will help to commercialize, but they're not going to invest in at the basic research level. And so I also wanted to show this chart that in 2014 there were roughly 759 companies were formed. Now this next chart adds to the previous chart because what it shows is that there may have been 759 companies that were formed, but there were more than 3,500 companies that were ongoing. And so that's very, very important. And what we have found too with entrepreneurship and with tech transfer is that These companies are creating the benefactors of the future, right? When you think of so many schools who, we can cite some of the schools who have been focused on tech transfer, and they've invested in their students and helped them to start companies, just like this competition here today. You're generating products and services that will help us to live a little longer, to help with transportation, but also you're creating the benefactors. Those are the ones that will come back to Stevens and will see a building that they may have taken a class in, or a new building, and say, I think I want my name up on that building because I want to give back. And so that's a virtuous cycle that we see, and that's a very important part of our country, where we know that the entrepreneur, I like to say that the entrepreneur seeks to control his or her own destiny and wants to do the unprecedented, wants to do something that's never been done before. And that's the great thing about entrepreneurship, right? Is that that entrepreneurship is forward-looking, wants to do something that's never been done before. How many of you want to start a company and your background is that your family has never started a company before? Please raise your hand. Okay, so all of your families have started a company? No one wants to start a company? Okay, great. That's the great thing about the knowledge that you're getting, is that you're being empowered to do something that, to start a new chapter in your family's, in your family tree. And so, but it starts with the university. We've been called to do so many things. Now, back to regulation. Typically, once money is made, once again, when we transform knowledge into money, we find that rules come about. Rules are about responding to something that someone has some concerns with, or to make them better. Well, the American Invents Act was passed in 2011, and so now we've moved away from first to invent to first inventor to file. And this is very, very important, because this was done to harmonize, to quote unquote, to harmonize with the rest of the world. I have some questions and some concerns with the American Invents Act, because when you think of when someone invents something, right? Typically you play around, you just want to build a prototype, you want to see whether it works before you run to the patent office to file some IP, right? Now with the American Invents Act, we move from first to invent to first inventor to file. So now it's kind of the race to the patent office. And it has sent some shockwave through academia, because the research model is that you publish or perish. So therefore, as soon as you come up with something with an idea, you want to publish in a referee journal. And in the past, you had a grace period of up to a year to file the IP. Now, under the first inventor to file, we've done away with that grace period. So it's sent shockwaves on campus. So a researcher now is not willing to share what they have discovered. And so, and part of what we've been able to do these many years is that when you think of entrepreneurship, when you think of innovation, that it's based upon discovery, it's based upon sharing knowledge. And now, because there's fear with regard to the American Invents Act, now there's going to be a wall put up right away, because you don't know whether or not what you have come up with will be classified as prior art. And so my office, within the Office of Advocacy, was asked to write a report on the move from first to invent to first inventor to file. I think that report should be coming out this year, which is probably about 3 years later than it should be. It was an unfunded mandate. I was asked to do it, but they didn't give me funds to do it, so I didn't do it. But what I did do, because there's discussion right now with regard to what's called patent trolls, and so there's legislation right before Congress, right before the various branches of government within the state of New Jersey, because there's something with regard to patent trolls that we need to be careful of. Patent trolls are not good, right? We can all agree. The challenge with the legislation, the way that it stands, is that patent trolls are broadly defined as non-practicing entities. And so that may lump in universities, that if you're a university and you want to license your technology to a company because you're a non-practicing entity, you could be lumped up into a patent troll. So as we write the legislation, we have to make sure that that we do no harm, but also that we don't create a system that we're going to have to go back and fix right away. And so I wanted to show this slide here because with regard, there was a Supreme Court ruling last June. It was Alice Corp versus CLS Bank, and this dealt with business method patents. This business method patent, what Alice Corp claimed is that they had invented a way to add numbers together, and they wanted to have and they had a patent on it. And so, I mean, it's an obvious patent, but still they had a patent on it. And so what the Supreme Court was able to do, well, what they did is that they overturned. They said that the patent office needs to go back and to review whether or not this patent should have been granted. And so what we're seeing now, we're seeing a reduction in some of what we call the business method patent for all software. And so these are some of the things that happen as a result of regulation and as a result of what's going on within our government. It's important that you as an entrepreneur, as you start a company, as you have an idea, that you understand what this playing field is like, because at some point you're going to want to raise money, or if there's an acquisition, the first thing that the other side will do, that the acquirer will do, will go back and look to see how solid is the IP, whether it's valid. I mean, they're going to pare through all the records to make sure that it makes sense to acquire, because they don't want to take on the liability. And so these are some of the things that you need to be aware of. With regard to patent trolls, I wrote a letter to Congress last year, and I outlined what are some of the things that I believe we need to consider before coming up with new legislation. One is the end user customer stays, which says that if you're an end user of technology, that if someone, that before you can be sued, that you should not be sued because you're an end user of technology. That if I buy software from company X and I have not changed that software at all, it's not my problem. You have to address company X. And so that's one. Two, I was concerned with what's called mandatory fee shifting, which says that, basically is that if I lose the case, then loser pays. That would send chills through startups and small businesses. That if I'm a small business and I know, and I'm going up against a bigger company, and if I know that if I lose, that I have to pay the legal bills, I don't think that makes sense, right? That's going to make it such that I'm not going to want to challenge that company. A third point that I also pointed out was that I was against something called the joinder of all interested parties. That says that if a small company loses a lawsuit or is being sued, then the winning party has a right to go after the investors of that company. So just think that if Stevens had taken an equity stake in Company A, who felt that they were being infringed by a larger company, if Company A lost, then that larger company could say, we're not just going after Company A, we're going after Stevens because Stevens is a joinder, is an interested party. And so, and so when you read the rules, when you get into it, you see that these, now note there are some larger companies that I won't mention here, had some concerns because when I shared with the White House that I was going to send this letter, they said, well, you could send the letter, but I just want you to know there's some companies that have come to us and said that they have concerns. And these are big companies. We would all know who these companies are. They're for these provisions. They were once small too, but once you get big, then I guess then you want to protect your turf. There was another concern. This dealt with the bonding, which says that before you could sue, you had to show that you had roughly about $5 million in the bank, because in case you lose, you need to pay up. Now, what small company has this $5 million just sitting around that they could put into a bond? Not too many. And so, so I can go on and on and on, but what I wanted to share in this slide is that when we think of the rules that govern how we start companies and grow companies, it's just like playing a sport, right? It's important to know the rules, to know what's out of bounds, what's a foul, what's a concussion, what's a timeout. And if the larger players are able to set the rules, then it's hard for the emerging companies, the smaller players, to play. They have not become laws. This letter that I wrote, I think, kind of mucked it up a little bit, and so there are some senators who were not happy because they were for it. But in the next couple of weeks, you're going to hear more about patent trolls. There's legislation right now they're discussing, and so keep your eye open and ears open to what's being discussed, and to make sure that that when you see any bill, to look to see whether or not they have these sorts of provisions within them. I just want to wrap up a few slides in terms of the university is playing such a major role. Tech transfer, right? This is a slide by the former CEO, the former president and CEO of Kauffman, Carl Schramm, said that there are only 5 schools that do it well. But this is a long game. This is a long process. These schools started a long time ago. And the great thing about entrepreneurship is that just because they do it well doesn't mean that they'll always do it well. That means that there's always a chance. That's the great thing about the future, right? It's unprecedented. No one knows what the future will hold, and the rules and what will happen, we just don't know yet. And so we have a chance to compete. And so I would encourage Stevens, and I was pleased that I got a chance to see the long-term plan, that there's going to be great things that will happen. I mean, because it starts with a vision. It's just like anything else, right? It starts with a vision. It starts with commitment. It starts with a team that will come together, and it ends with execution. And so I want to say that success in tech transfer is a long-term play. There's some schools that have been at it a long time, but there's so many things that are changing now in academia. I think this gives Stevens an opportunity to compete. Your location is great. I am a Kauffman Fellow, and I remember a couple of years ago when we had a major VC event right in Manhattan, and what we were told is that the folks out in Silicon Valley are shaking in their boots. And they're shaking in their boots because they recognize that as soon as more engineering comes to this area, then there's going to be a shift from Silicon Valley here. Because when you think of the population, when you think of Wall Street, advertising, there's so much going on here. And so this is a place where you can play a huge role. And so I just want to wrap up. What I wanted to share, and I hope it came across, is that government is an essential partner in the innovation ecosystem process. That when we think of innovation and entrepreneurship, it operates on knowledge, and we're generating knowledge here. That's what the university does. We generate knowledge. But when we think of entrepreneurship, we're going to take that knowledge and commercialize it and monetize it and transform it back into money. You're central to what this region is going to hold. The university, the walls of the university, or the reach, it does not stop at the 55 acres of this campus. It's much broader. And that's a good thing. We also want to make sure that the regulatory system works, that the patent office works, so that when you come up with new ideas and new technologies, that you're able to commercialize them, that you're able to own them, that you know what the playing field is. Make sure that Congress is aware, that you're aware of how important you are to our economy, to our way of life. And that's where that public-private partnership takes place. That's where the alumni, as they go see their member, their representative, you want to make sure, hey, tech transfer is important. We need funding, for education, but also we want to make sure the rules work, because we're in this game. We're in this for the long haul. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to me rant a little bit. I love to talk about this subject. When I think of entrepreneurship, it's something that I'm trained as an engineer, and I'm trained at solving problems. So I spend my time looking at the problem, but then spending time coming up with a solution. And so I know that that's how you are trained as well, and I'm quite sure that you're going to be very, very successful going forward. I want to thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have time for a couple of questions.
Thanks, very informative. The 5 big schools are enormous. And if you took a per capita evaluation of the same thing, let's say take the number of patents divided by the number of faculty members, you probably get a very different result. Have you looked into that to see which schools would stand out on a per capita basis?
I haven't taken a look at that. Yes, these schools are very enormous, and they've been doing tech transfer for quite some time. I think what may separate these schools from the rest is that the input, right? I mean, that if you look at the funding they receive, once again, research is a transformation of money into knowledge. So if you look at the budget they get from the government, they're getting a lot of funding, and the output is knowledge. So I would look at they're enormous, but also their funding is enormous, and so that helps them. But also what we know about technology is that technology and knowledge is not localized to any school or any community. It only takes one major hit to transform an institution. I mean, and so yes, one could look at how big these schools are and how long they've been in the game, but it only takes one. I mean, it's okay to be a one-hit wonder, because if that one hit is so huge, I like to say that Bill Gates is a one-hit wonder, but his one hit is so big, who cares, right? So yes, so that's that's the age that we're in, is that I believe more schools will be able to compete. It'll just take more time.
Hi, I'm a passionate entrepreneur, and I had a startup. I won some awards as an inventor. But my question is, if you have a patent, they say, it's worthless unless you have the funds to defend it. It could cost $1 million or $2 million to enforce IP rights. And when I had a company that was sued by the Attorney General for taking advantage of entrepreneurs, and they ran with my ideas, and I'd go to law firms, they're like, if you have $1 million, we'd love to help you. If you got 500,000, we'd love to help you, or 2 million, we'll take your case. And I'm like, how is justice? Justice should never be about money, but it's seeming that it is. And it can be so hard to find a firm that will do it on a contingency. So my question is, what do you think about the current situation where to defend your patent rights, it's so expensive to do? Do you think there could be something to lessen that expense, or to make justice equal for all or fair for all? Because to me, if the average person doesn't have $1 million to invest in litigation, and what do you think about all that?
Well,
and it was sad. It was sad because I thought it would be so easy to find a firm to help you, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you got $300,000, but we're taking."
well, that's a real concern, right? Because you're spending, because one is encouraged to file a provisional and go through the patent system, and then you gain a patent, but then someone will infringe knowing that you can take them to court, but they're going to outlast you because they're going to drive you into bankruptcy to force you to either give up or sue. And so, but there are some organizations that would work with you, and so I could probably point you to some small companies or some trade associations who might be able to work with you on that. But that is a real concern. Yeah, and when you think of patents, in the biotech space, in the pharma space, they respect IP. In electronics, everyone infringes, and then they'll say, okay, I'll cross-license my technology, my rights to my technology with your rights, and that's a huge problem. And so that's where I was looking for ways to help strengthen the system, and so maybe you may have some ideas.
$200 billion a year is lost to IP theft and piracy. $200 billion. Do you think there could be something to be done to lower that? That's and over 1 million jobs a year, and I think a lot of these challenges have to do with enforcing. And if it was easier to, or less costly to enforce your rights, we could maybe reduce some of that. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are as an expert.
Well, and that's why I mentioned about the American Invents Act, but also the Patent Troll Bill, because what these patent troll bills would do, if not written very well, it would raise the bar, right? I mean, because then you as a small business, you as an entrepreneur would be more disadvantaged. And so we're trying to find a way to right-size the system. We're not there yet. And so maybe that's an idea for a new company. And so those of you who, once again, as an entrepreneur, you now know what the problem is. Now once you come up with a solution, that could be a huge, huge opportunity.
All right, we have one more question down here.
I'm Dawn Zimmer. I'm the mayor of Hoboken. I want to thank you very much. Your talk really helps to inform the legislative issues around this, so I certainly hope that our two senators are on the right track on this. I'll be speaking to them. Wanted to just ask your thoughts on, as the mayor of Hoboken, what we're focused on is trying to create accelerator space, create space for startups as we go through the redevelopment process. We have many redevelopment and rehab areas around the city, and looking to make it possible for a lot of these companies, potential companies that we saw today, to be able to stay, have their start in Hoboken. And just wanted to see if you could speak to that, if you think that's a good idea and a good direction to go in, and other models around the country that you think we should be looking at to do that.
Well, with regard to accelerators, and we actually did a study, and we looked at the various models, whether it's a co-working space or an incubator. I'm very bullish on accelerators, because what we know is that we're trying to find a way to engage the alumni who want to give back, and they can serve as advisors to these companies. And so once it's close to campus, once it's close in a city like this where you're close to everything, I think that the alumni who want to come back, you know, they've been very successful. They have given money, but also they want to give their time and talent. And so as a student, you enjoy being around campus. You have access to professors. You have access to research. You have access to those who you know can help you. And so by having something close to campus, you know, that would be great, because students could work all night, work all day. You know, it creates an environment of where people are coming in. You know, it's this whole thing that I said with regard to the regional impact of the university. And so if I was starting an incubator, I would start it near either a metro area or a university's campus, because I want to tap into that talent. So I think that it would be a great idea.
Okay, thank you very much again.
Thank you.
That's a little plaque for you. So let me just read it. Presented to Winslow, Sargeant, PhD, in appreciation of your contribution to the Thomas H. Scholl Lecture by visiting entrepreneurs at the Innovation Expo, Stevens Institute of Technology, April 29, 2015.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.